anyway, thanks for having me. I'm really excited about what you guys are doing here, and thank you for partnering with the Laundry Project over these several years without even really fully being formed as a church. It is true, they did think I was a scam when I went in there and talked to the owners the first day. To be honest, Jeremy does look a little scary, and he does look a little bit like a shyster, so to be fair, that's what they thought. But they really loved it. They fell in love with it right away, and so every year since then, they've been really nice to us, very kind to us to let us serve the community there. And they actually give back as well and contribute. And yesterday we did a huge mural on the interior of the laundromat. This guy right here in the middle, his name's Josh. He's from Tampa with me as well. About a year ago, we started a campaign called the Clean Campaign, and working with laundromats where we paint a mural on the laundromat, usually on the exterior of the laundromat, but here, none of the laundromats have their own building, so they're all in shopping centers, so that we couldn't do that. But typically what we do, part of the idea of the Laundry Project is to help beautify neighborhoods and to not only bring love and dignity within the context of the laundromat, but with this, saying we want to bring some love and dignity and empowerment to the exterior, to the neighborhood around it, to give the idea that have some pride in your neighborhood and love the place you're at, and to help lift the neighborhood a little bit. And so yesterday we did one inside because it's the only spot we could do it. So Josh slept for like 2 hours and just worked on a mural for the past 2 days. So we'll show you some pictures and all that kind of stuff. So thank you for contributing to that and being a part of that with us. So let's jump into this. The book of James that we're going through, which is a really interesting book, discussion on the book of James. The series, the big idea for the series is faith comes fully alive when beliefs and behaviors fully align. Which is an interesting statement because faith, when we talk about faith is one of those like religious kind of obscure words. Like we know instinctively what faith means when we use it in context, but if someone asks us to define faith, we don't really have a good working definition that makes a lot of sense. And if you've grown up in church, then you kind of have a whole different understanding of what faith means. But if you're like me, growing up in church, I can't give a definition that doesn't sound weird about faith. And so we kind of talk about it in weird ways, but let me kind of break it down for you in the way that I would put it. Faith to me is kind of like this. Faith is kind of like promises. How many of you are married, by the way? Raise your hand. Okay, so I'm getting married this year. We're writing our own vows. Vows are promises, right? Everyone says their vows, their promises at their wedding. But one of the things that I realize about promises is that promises are really just words, until we actually put belief and action to those words. When we're forced in a position, say in the context of a marriage, of actually living out the words, the promise that you've said of for better, which is always the easy one, right? Like when you're hot and young and everything's great. For worse, when I don't even like you, I just want to punch you in the face this morning. Like when you get to that point and something forces you to go, for worse, I am with you. I am committed to you. And this is the moment where I have to believe that, and I have to prove to you that I believe that by acting it out. For me to wrap my head around the word faith, that's how I context it. That faith is something we talk about when it comes to Christianity or a religious context. When we talk about faith, it's something we just talk about until we're forced into a position that we have to truly believe what we've said and prove that we believe it by acting it out, by putting it into action. James talks a lot about that, and James is an interesting book because James, interestingly, there's kind of debate about which James is the actual author of this book. There's multiple Jameses kind of mentioned throughout the New Testament, but the main belief is that James, the half-brother of Jesus, is who authored this book. The fascinating thing about James is that James, when Jesus was on earth, speaking as the Messiah, claiming to be the Messiah, and doing the things that he did, James did not believe in his own half-brother was who he said he was. James did not become a person of faith or a follower of Christ until after Jesus' death on the cross and resurrection. That is when he became and began believing and trusting in that. So for James to write about faith, he's got a really interesting perspective. And James, the book of James is kind of like the book of Proverbs. If you've ever read Proverbs, it's a bunch of like really great Twitter quotes that you can, because they're like these really short, 1-2 sentence, like you could sound really smart by just tweeting Proverbs verses. And there's where a lot of books are storied, like it's a continuation of verses built on each other and in kind of a story form, where Proverbs is these just statement after statement of thoughts and truths. James is a little bit like that, where in a few verses he'll make a truth and then he just kind of shifts gears into something else. But the more you read it, you'll find a theme kind of going throughout it of this faith, of understanding of faith all the way through and what that looks like, but not faith in just something we talk about, but something that we live and breathe every day. So in James chapter 1, I want to read this first couple of verses that we're going to focus on here for the next couple minutes. Starting in verse 2, he says this. He's writing this letter to people that are believers, that are already Christians. And he says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow." Let me pause right here for a second. Every time I read that statement, the only thing I can think of is Frozen. Let it go. And in my head, when I read that, it reads this way. Let it grow for when your endurance, and I feel like James just sings that and then keeps going in normal speak. So anyway, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow, for when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. The Message translation, which is kind of a paraphrase, storied form of the Bible, reads this way. Consider it a sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come at you from all sides. You know that under pressure, your faith life is forced into the open and shows its true colors. So don't try to get out of anything prematurely. Let it do its work so you become mature and well-developed, not deficient in any way. I love these few verses because in a very short statement, he outlines for us what faith as action looks like. Because really, faith has to be forced into belief and action. We can talk about it. About a year ago, one of my best friends, the guy that was like a brother to me, February of 2016, was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. He's a 44-year-old guy, 5 kids, one of the best people I've ever known. Gets diagnosed with cancer. 6 months later, he died. And I've been in church my entire life. I've gone through struggles in life. But about this time last year was the first time that I really had a conversation with God where I said something to the effect of, "This is why people don't like you." In fact, I'm not even sure I really like you right now. I'm not sure that I believe that you are what you say you are, what the Bible says that you are. Because as I think a lot of us do, when something tragic happens to us, we immediately start asking questions like, why? God, why did you do this? Why did you let this happen? Why did this fall apart? Why didn't it go the way that I wanted it to go? And in his context, immediately what I thought was, here's a guy that literally was one of the best people I've ever seen. I did his funeral in July of last year. Remember, 44-year-old guy. There were 900 people at his funeral. This guy had a big influence. We jokingly called him, not jokingly, but it was serious, but we called him a hope dealer. Because he was a guy that no matter what was going on in your life, you could be down and depressed about anything. And if you told him about it, he would always find the silver lining in whatever was going on to you, and he would point it out to you and would encourage you and bring you out of it. He was one of the biggest support systems for Current, for our laundry projects and all the things that we do. He was on our board. He was a guy that I knew no matter what I was struggling with, what decision I was struggling with, I could call him and I would feel better after that phone call. And when he died, I looked at God and said, you let all these jerks who murder people, all kinds of things, you let them live, and you let them live long lives. Why on earth would you let in a world that is so broken and we see pain all over the place, why would you take someone that is the opposite of that? Now, I've never gotten an answer, but that's okay. Because exactly what I've gone through the past year is exactly what this passage talks about. Because what it did for me is it forced me to make a choice of belief of, am I going to truly live out the promise and walk through it and let endurance and growth happen in my life, or am I going to retreat into sadness and anger and disbelief? And that is a very difficult thing to reconcile because we want answers. The first thing that we like to do is ask why. We like to avoid endurance. When he says there, you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. When I see that word endurance, the first thing I think of is running, and I hate running. Does anybody run? Like, do you get up in the morning and run, or in the afternoon, like, hey, I'm just going to go for a run? I don't know, a few of you I don't know, but just based on your answer, I think you are weird. I'm just kidding. I hate running. I played basketball in high school, and I loved running for that. If you see me running down the street, something bad is probably behind me. That's the only time you're going to see me running. But running is the first thing that I think of about running. Here's what you ever notice runners never look real happy? Have you noticed that? None of them look happy. A marathon. You seen somebody finish a marathon? None of them at the end of it have I seen. None of them are smiling, crossing them. They kind of look like this guy. Run a marathon, they said. It'll be fun, they said. Like, that's kind of how I feel about it. Like, when I see runners, I'm like, that's exactly what I think runners look like. It's terrible. But running is important because it does build endurance. The thing that I understand about running, and I understand very little about it, but what I do understand about it, from playing sports and growing up, same thing. We would run sprints back and forth down the court, and I hated it. It was the worst. But what it did for me is when in the game, when that commitment had to become real, that I could stay in there to finish the game, that endurance that was built prior to that brought me through. Faith is much like that. And that's what James is trying to say to us here. And here's the big idea that I want you to get. The thing that I want you to take home in this talk is this: that how we respond to what happens to us is an act of faith. How we respond to the things that happen to us is an act of faith. And I'm going to put a caveat to this that's not even in there. Especially the painful, excruciating things that we never wanted and we have no control over. Because here's the reality. Whether we respond with, I'm angry, I'm fearful, most of us would go, and largely Christianity would say, faith is responding in the proper way of faith in God and saying, God, I know that you're bigger than this, and responding in that way. But I would argue that faith is also responding the opposite of that. The difference is when we respond in anger and fear and we retreat, what we're putting our faith in is the troubles that have just come to us. We're putting our faith in the fact that trouble can dictate who we are and what we become. But when we respond with hope and growth and allow the endurance, the growth to happen, what we're saying in that is we are now putting faith in a God that is bigger than the trouble that came to us. And saying, God, I am trusting you to take me through this, over this, whatever, however you want to say it, to get me past this so that I can be a better person for whatever reason. One of my good friends was in New York on 9/11 in one of the buildings right next to the Twin Towers. That morning, she was one of the people that you saw on the news, like coming out of the dust and walking across the bridge just to get out of Manhattan so that they could escape. She struggled with it for years because she kept asking this question of why, like, God, why would you let this happen? Why would you let something like this happen? All these innocent people dying, all this kind of stuff. And she taught me a lesson one day because through that, at one point in her office, like cussing at God, screaming at God, so angry and hurt over what she experienced and what she went through and the friends that she lost. Something dawned on her in that moment, that she was asking the wrong question. And she said, now I approach everything in life not asking the question why, but asking the question, what now? And she said, I know it's a very simple thing. It's almost like somewhat of a similar question, but I realized that asking why is putting my faith in fear and blame and anger. But when I ask what now, that's me putting my faith in hope, in growth, and endurance. And when it comes to this passage and in dealing with life, I mean, every one of us, we know life is tough, right? Every one of us. There's no question. We know life is difficult. We face difficulties all the time, some small, some big. And we all respond in a certain way. It's kind of the fight or flight idea. We all have a natural instinct to respond in a certain way. And how we respond in that moment is an act of our faith. And my question to you today is, when you face the excruciating, painful things that are out of your control, will your response to them be faith in that painful, excruciating thing that you can't control and allow it to throw your life into chaos? Or will you respond with hope and endurance and say, I'm putting my faith in something bigger than that trouble? And I may never get an answer to why, but that's okay because I don't need the answer why. What I need to know is what now? What do I do now? That this has happened because I can't control it. What do I do now? So the one thing now that I can do is to take the next step, just like running. Do I keep taking a step to move forward, to run, or do I collapse like the guy in the picture? That to me is what faith fully alive looks like. Is when we are forced into that situation of making that faith real and actionable, what will we do? I want to finish with a clip from a movie. I'm a big superhero nerd, so I love the Incredible Hulk shirt, by the way. I'm a big superhero nerd. And I don't want to get into an argument about it because I'm right. Batman is the only really important superhero. Just kidding. But I do love Batman. But there's a scene from an X-Men movie that is so fascinating to me because in the scene, a young version of this character in his mind is able to travel to the future and talk to the older version of himself. And though we could never actually do that, and it would be nice to be able to do that and be able to look to a future version of ourselves and ask ourselves, are we going to be okay? Are we going to make it through this thing? And that older version of ourselves like, yeah, you're going to be fine. That's not faith. Faith is being able to walk through that and become that older version and not give it to ourselves, but to be able to impart that to other people around us. But what he says in this clip, the older version of himself to his younger version of himself, is fascinating because what he says is, I think, something that all of us need to understand, that bearing each other's burden and pain is important. But in order for us to do that, we have to experience that struggle of faith as well, to impart that to other people when they come behind us. It's such a beautiful statement. What you're afraid of is your pain. But if you allow yourself to feel it and embrace it, in their context, you will become more powerful. What James says there, let it grow. Let your endurance grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. That doesn't mean that we'll necessarily be perfect people, but we will be stronger and better, and we will be better at living our lives, showing other people what faith looks like, that there is a better path. And just because we stumble and we run into moments where we question God and ask Him why, doesn't mean we're lost forever. It means we can still get back up and move, and it's dependent on us encouraging each other and pushing each other forward in that and believing and offering in faith. I'll close with this. Proverbs 4:23 says, be careful what you think, because your thoughts run your life. Be careful what we think, embracing that pain, not looking at, I don't want to experience that pain, I want to retreat from it, and putting faith in the wrong things, but responding to faith in the proper way with hope again. So that's my challenge to you.